as promised, firing up Mons 1914 at Villers Cottérêts. So game's not set up yet, and I do want to get an introduction going with this. And I usually don't do this type of thing, but I feel that it's pretty warranted here because there are some real rough edges to this, even just getting it set up and understanding the rules already. I haven't even played yet, and I can already see some wild inconsistencies of what's going on here. So first of all, let's move this out of the way. Here's the rule book. I've read the 10 pages of rules, and this book needed about half a dozen more passes in the development department to smooth out some stuff that is either wildly internally inconsistent or doesn't make sense. So first of all, my complaints with this are varied and numerous. But the biggest thing is when I started to try and set up the game, I seem to have discovered that the game is being portrayed in two different command level scales for each side. So units come in, let me get the light out of the way, sorry. Units come in two different colors for both sides. You've got this light tan and this darker tan for the British. You've got this darker gray and lighter gray for the Germans. Somewhere in the rules I expected to tell me what that meant, and that is not the case. So what happens is during setup, the only indication that I have that there's a difference here is that in the British setup, it says all units of the 4th Guards Brigade set up along these hexes. I am not quite sure what the 4th Guards Brigade is. My initial thought is that all of these units with a unit identifier with G are probably the 4th Guards Brigade. Maybe. I'll leave that there for a second. The next thing that the setup tells is that at the start of the game, British units from the 6th Brigade, and then specifically identifies which units are from the 6th Brigade. Okay, they all have to set up here at Villers-Cottérêts. All right, got it. All of these units that they outlined in the rules are these particular formations in the light tan. Great. Okay, so that must mean by process of elimination that this is the Guards Brigade. Understood. This artillery unit is not actually listed as a part of any of these formations. So I have to, but it is light tan, so I have to assume it is part of this 6th Brigade. It doesn't say so on the counter, but we're going to assume that it is. Now, each of these counters has a different color for their formations. Okay, gotcha. No idea what necessarily that means. I believe what I am able to put together here is that each of these colored formations is a regiment that is part of the 6th Brigade. And I am led to believe that because the HQ counter, which by the way, the rules don't ever use the word HQ, they use the word leader. I guess that means that based on their description of the values on leaders, that this is what a leader is an HQ. So I'm going to assume that is the case. And they are now regiment sized. So I'm going to guess that each of these colored formations are the regiments that make up the 6th Brigade. Now, this is just sort of my knowledge of military organization that I have from playing tons and tons of war games. If you're coming to this game for the first time, you're going to be absolutely lost with how you set up the game or what some of the rules mean, or imply, in fact. Okay, so I figured it out for the British. We've got the 6th Brigade, and we've got the 4th Guards Brigade. These two in sort of seemingly independent howitzer units, I guess, are attached to those brigades. I can buy that. That's fine. Then we come to the Germans. Now, the rules seem to indicate that the German command structure is on the divisional scale because it mentions a couple of times 2 divisions. And there are a bunch of units that are in the light and dark, like I mentioned. And I think that the light and dark are different German divisions, which would seem to make sense. And that would lead me to believe that the orange here, for example, would be a brigade in that division. Okay, nowhere in the rules does it specify what brigade or division is what, or what the command breakdown of each unit is. So that makes setup extremely confusing, and you have to kind of divine it from the rules. But that's not the only complaint I have. The next complaint I have here is where it talks about what the values are on a unit. Combat units have 2 values printed on their fresh side. Strength points and morale. Okay, so here's a combat unit. It doesn't tell me which value is which, but by process of elimination, I have to assume that that is strength and that is morale. That is my guess, because on the back of machine guns, when they become broken, they only have one value, and there's a chance that they can rally in a given turn to become unbroken. So I have to assume the lower right value is their rally value and not their combat strength value. That one may be less of a complaint because it's using the typical attack sort of other value here on the counter. Okay, that's fine. The problem is that it talks about leaders, which again have HQ on the counter. It says that they have morale and leadership, and British units have combat power. So I guess that means that this is combat morale, and then this is their leadership value. Where we get into trouble is that this leadership value, which very clearly is a -1, is actually a positive modifier in combat. And it's a negative modifier in morale, and it doesn't actually specify that in the rules anywhere. So it's very misleading that this is a negative number, because it implies that it takes away from something, which it does in morale checks, but in combat it actually adds a DRM. So that's a little bit confusing. It also talks about machine gun and artillery units having a range, so it has the firepower and morale, but it also talks about them having a range and a rate of fire value. So as far as I can tell, the range is this one in the circle. It never once defines that, which is incredible to me, that there's not any picture of a counter in here. It talks about what the values are. So I'm guessing that's the range at which they can fire. Okay, makes sense. The problem is that, so the problem here is that the rate of fire here, that has to be that. But nowhere in the rules does it say that artillery has anything to do with rate of fire. The only thing I can find in the rules about rate of fire applies to machine gun units. And it's pretty clear what rate of fire does. If you roll really well, you can actually keep firing. But for some reason, artillery has a rate of fire, and I don't know what that means. So not sure what's going on there. Okay, but my complaints don't end there. A couple of other problems. Here's the terrain effects chart, which is awesome, right? Right on the back of the rules tells you the movement cost and the defensive value of the terrain. Great, awesome. Unfortunately, there is no terrain key anywhere on the map. So I've had to put together what I think things are. Clear makes total sense. That's a clear hex. Got it. Light woods and regular woods. Okay, light woods is probably this. Regular woods is probably this. That seems reasonable. I guess, although then you've got like this terrain, which kind of looks, I guess, is woods on a slope, upslope, where these lines. Okay, that makes sense to me as well. There's line of sight rules in this game. Speaking of that, here's my other thing that I'm really confused about. So one of the pieces, one of the things about these counters is that we've got the range of fire, which a machine gun could fire 4 hexes away, assuming there's no blocking terrain. Great. The rules talk about blocking terrain. Literally nowhere in the game does it say what blocking terrain is. And to make matters more confusing, the rules specifically say that you can see, from a line of sight perspective, 3 hexes into forest, which is the only place in the rules that forest is mentioned, because the terrain is actually woods. So does forest mean regular woods? Like you can see 3 hexes into this? Does it include light woods? I have no idea because it doesn't actually say in the rules. So I'm going to play with the assumption that you can see 3 hexes into any woods, which would seem to make sense. It says forest in the rules, so it's not drawing a distinction between which terrain is considered forest. I'm going to assume it's woods and light woods, and that's how I'm going to play. Okay. It also never says what blocking terrain is. I did figure out in the rules that it's buried in a section where you wouldn't expect to find it, but basically you have to be, if there is blocking terrain, which again, the rules don't specify what blocking terrain is, but it does say that if you are in a non-clear hex and you're trying to fire, you have to be adjacent to a unit that you're firing at. So my guess is that forest or woods is blocking terrain, which means that while these cavalry are making their way through these woods, these units can't hit them. Secondly, we've got roads. Okay, roads here. That's pretty self-explanatory. Towns, which again look like piles of rubble, but they're labeled. So, okay, I got that. Ride. I don't know what that is. I am guessing, and I'm only guessing it's these lines on the map here, and I'm guessing what ride refers to is like a gully or like a drainage channel of some kind here. So if you're moving through a ride terrain, it goes through here. Anyways, the point I'm trying to make, a terrain key would have been super freaking helpful. And I don't understand how you don't notice that if you hand this game to someone and ask them to play it. And they don't ask that question upon immediately trying to move and or fight someone. Another small thing is that on the player aid here, it talks about being adjacent with artillery and MG units. Now, in the rules, it says artillery double their firepower when adjacent. Okay, great, that's on the player aid. But nowhere in the rules does it say that MG units double their firepower at adjacent units, except for a restatement of this player aid. So I guess that means that MG also get double, but it's not under the MG section of the rules, which is interesting. Another thing, here's the turn track. There's actually no turn marker for the game, so you have to use kind of your own piece. That's a little annoying. You'd think they'd make a turn counter. Okay, one more thing. I'm sorry that I'm complaining about this, but literally I've read the rules once and I have yet to play the game, and I can already spot some really bad discrepancies here. Break, definition of break. Unit degrades in status from fresh to disordered, disordered to broken, broken to routed, routed to eliminated. This is actually not true. This is actually patently false. Units degrade if they are infantry from fresh to disordered, disordered to routed, and routed to eliminated. Machine gun units and leaders/HQs and artillery go from fresh to broken and broken to eliminated. So this right here is one of the first things you read in the rules. Is actually wrong. And all you have to do is turn to a page, unless this is right and the rest of the rules are wrong, but they go into a lot more detail about unit status in other sections specific to units, and it actually means this is not correct. So just all in all here, I'm a little unimpressed with the first experience of just trying to learn the game. I wanted to do this video by playing the game and showing you how it works, and then talking about what I don't like and like about it. But already, before I've even started, there's just a ton of stuff that I've already caught that either makes no sense or is not explained or requires you to like figure out. Not a good start here, I guess, for this. I'm going to set this up, and then I'm going to talk about one more weird quirk with victory conditions, and then hopefully get playing. Okay, let's start talking about the actual game and get past all this BS. So here's the setup. I did actually play through a turn and aborted it because I realized some mistakes that were made, but here's the basic setup. You've got these units down here at Villers Cottérêts. They're not allowed to do anything. They're what's called fixed for most of the game, unless one specific thing happens related to victory, and it's actually very weird, and I will talk about that in a second. You've got the Guard Corps up here. They're covering this retreat. They are stretched out along these hexes, and actually, I think I may have cheated just a bit. Yeah, a little bit. This HQ needs to be with one of these units, so let's, because they have to start in either 04 or 05 hex rows. So let's do that. Okay, so this is the setup. So basically we're guarding this sort of approach. The German cavalry are going to start the game here on the northern edge. They're going to get to move. The very first turn is actually just a cavalry movement by the Germans, and then the rest of their units are going to get to come on. There are a lot of them. The game has a pretty interesting combat system that I'm excited to show you. It uses 4d6, or 2d6 twice, but one of those d6 is a base 6 tens ones digit, which is kind of interesting. The victory. Let's talk about strategy. So the Germans, they win an auto victory if they're able to open this road off the south edge of the map. So if they're able to blow through all these units in Villers Cottérêts, which if the Germans get down here, that's probably pretty bad. So this road, very key. Allies need to defend it at all costs. Otherwise, the game will end after turn 16, which is down here. And then the rules, so again, another place where the rules are weird. It says to count up the victory points of a side's eliminated firing strength points, basically. And you get a point for every one. The rules read like you count up the ones in your dead pile, but that cannot possibly be the case. It has to mean that you count up the amount you've eliminated from the opponent. So the Germans would count the British, and the British would count the Germans that they've eliminated. Otherwise, the game makes no sense. But again, the rules written very weird. So you're going to get points for that. And then there's an additional 10 points if the this brigade down here becomes unfixed. before turn 12. And the only way the rules say that can happen is that if a unit from this brigade routes into line of sight of this brigade, which I get makes sense thematically, like, oh god, our rear guard is being destroyed, like we need to, you know, get together and prepare for an attack. But what it actually functionally means from a gameplay perspective is that it like really disincentivizes the Germans from attacking, because if they rout one of these units and he routes back here and these guys see him, then suddenly these guys are free to do whatever they want. And now the Germans have to face off against a whole nother brigade. I don't know that they necessarily want that. And there's no way to control when a unit routes. It's based on their status in combat and what their dice rolls is for a morale check. So like if I'm the Germans in this game, why would I ever attack? Why wouldn't I just like chill at the top of the map and wait for time to run out? And that seems very strange. It seems like it wasn't tested, because like the gamer in me is like, I will never attack these guys for fear that they rout, and then these guys activate and suddenly the Germans have to like fight these guys. I guess the British could just come in and start wiping up Germans and win the game. I guess that's one thing. So I don't know. It's just very strange. And then another weird thing from the rules is that that's the only way these guys become unfixed. If for some reason the Germans were able to like make their way through here around this sort of like British cordon and start firing on these guys, the rules don't allow for them to respond to that. Like literally the Germans could come down here and start machine gunning British people, and they would literally have the rules don't allow them to fire back or move, which is incredibly strange. So I'm house ruling this right now, because that's silly, that if the Germans attack these units, they also become unfixed, and it does not award the British 10 victory points. That should have been in the rule book, but it's not. So that's what we're looking at here. So the British here, rear guard, they're going to want to protect this road. Germans, they're going to come down here. They're going to try and open this up, and then we're off. So leadership in this game, very important. Leaders are what allow units to coordinate fire. So you want to get your leaders next to as many units as possible when you're shooting. There are zones of control and things like that. I'm going to start playing, and then I will bring you in to show you a combat, to show you some of the tactical considerations, and hopefully not find any more holes in the rules of this game. All right, after the first German movement phase here, the British, it's the next full turn. Turns always start with a fire phase. So the British get to shoot, then they will get to move, and the Germans can fire back. Now, based on my reading of the rules, this machine gun unit here on this slope, he's up slope, he can see over blocking terrain into a hex beyond, which looks to be light woods, if I am not mistaken. So this machine gun unit can fire at this cavalry unit. So that's what we're going to do right now. If we look at the combat results table, so the way this works is actually pretty interesting. You don't actually fire against the strength of the unit, you fire against the terrain in the hex, and that's the odds that you get on the odds table. So we look at the firepower of the unit, that's 4. We look at not the unit here, but the terrain where the target is, and that is light woods, and that is going to be a defense value of 5. So we are 4 to 5. That goes to a 1 to 2 column attack. On this table. Now there are some interesting DRMs that you can get on this, like if you're enfilading someone, flanking them, the density of the target. So this is where the density and the stacking comes in. If you've got less than a battalion, there's actually a negative DRM. If you've got more than 1 battalion in the hex, then there's a positive DRM, so you probably don't want to be stacking a lot in this game. And if you're shooting at higher elevation, if the unit is disordered, if there's no line of communication, meaning a unit can't trace back to its side of the board, there's all of those types of things. Leadership would be in here, and then MGs and artillery get bonuses for firing adjacent. In this case, none of those apply, so we're just doing a flat roll in the 1 to 2 column. And we are going to roll up the 46, and then I'll show you what we roll. Oh, wow, okay. So first of all, we roll, so like I said, you're rolling a base 6, 10s, and 1s. So we rolled a 66, which is actually the best roll you could possibly get, which is kind of cool. Now, interestingly, if there are DRMs here, like if I were to get, like, let's say I got like a -8 DRM, this doesn't become a 58 because there is no 8 on a D6. This would become a 55, 54, it would become a 54, right? So the die is base 6, but the modifiers are sort of base 10, which is kind of an interesting combination. There's only a few games I've ever seen that done in. Anyways, in this case, no modifiers here. I got a 66. That's an amazing roll. It's also an even number. Whenever you roll an even number on these dice, that means your target has to take a morale check. And that is why we roll 2 other dice. So you look at the unit's morale value, which is here a 7, and you need to roll 2d6 equal to or less than that value. So in this case, the unit does pass its morale check. However, it also takes a hit because I rolled the maximum you could possibly roll, a 66 on the 1 to 2 table. So we give this unit a hit marker, and a number of hits that it takes to eliminate a unit is equal to its default combat strength. So cavalry units take 2 hits to kill, so he's at 50% strength now. So that was a pretty good shot from that machine gun unit on the hill, and pretty happy that I have him there. So that's how a combat works really quick. Every time you roll, you're going to roll these dice. If you get an odd number, let's say you rolled a 33, right? That wouldn't trigger a morale check. It may trigger a hit. So they're kind of independent of each other, which is kind of interesting. And I'll show you the combat table. You can see that, here's the table. And again, you're looking at firepower strength versus terrain defense strength, which is down here, to get these odds. What's interesting is that unless you have lots of firepower, you're mostly going to be rolling on the 1 to 2 column. Individual units typically are not going to be enough to get you into these upper levels, especially if you're firing into a town, which is an 8 defensive value. So kind of an interesting table here, interesting combat system, something that I think is pretty unique about the game. I might show you a couple more of these as we go. So one other quick thing I wanted to mention here, MGs and artillery, when they fire or move, they get one of these moved fired markers, and these have an effect. If I move an MG during the British movement phase, it cannot fire in the next fire phase. And if I fire it in the British firing phase, it then cannot move in the British movement phase. So your MGs are basically 1 action per turn, and you've got to pick which one you want them to do. Incidentally, no movement factors on the counters. All infantry units have a movement rating, and artillery have a movement value of 4. All HQs and cavalry units have a movement rating of 6. All right, here's a good example of the power of leadership and the power of artillery together. So this HQ is going to allow all these units to combine their fire because the HQ is adjacent to everyone, and he will give a +1 DRM to the fire roll. Now we're in this town, and we're kind of on this ridge here. You can see the Germans have moved in force. They're going to try and assault up this hill. Maybe not the best idea. With some other Germans over here trying to flank around. But in the meantime, this regiment, I guess, is going to try and fire. They're going to fire here. This unit is MG, obviously can see there. This HQ unit and its associated infantry here can see it. It is far enough away from this sort of ridge to be able to get visibility on it. And again, this unit can fire over this hex because it's higher. I'm trying to decide whether or not I want the artillery to fire as well. This howitzer, actually, he may not be able to fire because he is... Yeah, they need a spotter. And a spot for artillery... Yeah, he does have a spotter. Any of these units he's with has a spotter. So the decision I'm trying to make here is, do I want 11 against this guy and the howitzer to fire at someone else? There's also, or do I want the howitzer to join this attack and we would have 19 over here? That would be a 9-to-1, which seems kind of overkill, but I could also wipe that unit out potentially. Or maybe it's better to spread my fire around. I'll tell you what, let's do the howitzer and all of the units separately. So let's start here. We've got 6, 7, 11. We're gonna fire at that guy. Yeah, actually, I don't think the howitzer would need, I don't know that he has line of sight to anyone else. So I guess we're gonna join in. All right, we're all gonna fire here at this guy. He's just peeking out on the backside of this hill. So yeah, what did we say? 4, 5, 11, 19. 19 clear terrain defensive value is 2. That is going to be 9-to-1. Oddly, on the combat results table, 7-to-1 and 9-to-1 are the same. So it doesn't really matter there. So yeah, 7. You know what? I'm going to save the artillery. I'm going to save the artillery for the German turn because if they come up that hill, then I can fire the howitzer at him. So it's going to be just the units. So I take it back. 7, 4, 11. 11 to a defense of 2. So we are at 5-to-1. We roll. We are getting a +1 to the roll because of the HQ's value. We are getting a column shift to the right, actually, because we are firing from a higher elevation. And yeah, the density, nothing there. Okay, so we get a 36 after the modifier on the 6-to-1 column. Here's the morale check that this unit is going to fail, but he doesn't have to make because this is an odd number. But we did get 36, so that's going to be 2 hits actually to this unit here, which is pretty good. He's halfway to eliminated. So that's the power of the HQ coordinating fire. I guess the leader coordinating fire there. So that's how that works. Okay, another weird rules thing that I can't seem to find the answers to. Specifically under the German howitzers are unique in that they may fire over all blocking terrain or units so long as they have a spotter that can see the target. First of all, does that imply that regular artillery cannot fire if there's blocking terrain? That doesn't seem to make sense. If you're using an indirect fire weapon like artillery, you're not firing it straight ahead. You're firing it in an arcing, like a lob, right? So that would be the reason that you need a spotter adjacent in order to fire it. But the rules specifically call out the German howitzers. They can fire over all blocking terrain, which implies that other artillery cannot, which doesn't make sense on this map because literally unless artillery are right next to something, they are not going to be able to shoot at it. Maybe that's the intention, but then why give them a range? So I guess they could fire from 3 hexes away through woods. It would be the situation there. 1, 2, 3. I guess. I think that's what the rules are telling me. Now, what's interesting is that note that both of the British artillery are howitzers, but the rules say German howitzers are unique. So does this mean that the British howitzers follow the rules of the German howitzers, even though the rules say that German howitzers are unique in this ability? As you can see, it's just like an endless knot of like nonsense anytime I'm trying to find an answer for something. So I'm having to house rule all over the place. I guess in this particular case, I honestly don't know. I don't know what the intent of the design is. Is the intent that artillery can't fire through blocking terrain? If that's the case, they have to be next to someone, which doesn't make sense for artillery. So I'm going to play that if they have a spotter, they can fire through blocking terrain, I guess. Otherwise, why have all of these units? I don't know. I'm not entirely certain and the rules aren't clear. I'm so frustrated with this game's rules. So the British here decided to make an attack with this HQ and infantry battalion here against this guy who had come up the hill. They did 2 hits. What I can't figure out is that if he decides to shoot back during his during this German fireback phase, if the hits also reduce his strength points. The rules talk about a unit number of steps being equal to their strength points, but it doesn't actually specify whether or not. It's very unclear on units taking losses reducing their strength points. I'm going to play that it does, because it does, I don't know. I just don't know. It's not explicitly spelled out that the language that is used is very non-specific and confusing and implies that it may reduce their strength points, or it just means it's the number of hits they have to take. It makes equivalencies between strength points and number of steps that a unit has. So I have to assume that when you're taking 2 hits, you're not only losing 2 steps but also taking 2 strength point losses. There's not a clear definition, and I'm almost at my wit's end 3 turns into the game. British just absolutely getting overrun here, and maybe, I'm not playing them very well, but it doesn't seem possible given the movement rates in this game and the cavalry that they have to contend with that they really even stand a chance. You're forced to start way up here forward, and there's just not enough firepower. I mean, they're taking upwards of 4 artillery barrages kind of per flank every turn. This unit is now stuck. He cannot move here. He's been completely surrounded, so he's probably going to die. The Germans just have to kind of mop it up. These units are kind of pulling back to this ridge as quickly as possible. Maybe that should have been the first move the British made, which was to, fall back immediately. Because I think, the amount of force that the Germans have, you've really got to, attack them as they're approaching and don't give them a shot back. But, realistically here, the Allies have done some damage, but the Germans are just too numerous, and now that we're sort of in close contact, you can't outrun them, especially if you're wanting to shoot this howitzer. This British howitzer is probably left for dead now because he had to shoot last turn to open up the zones of control so that these units could get back, and in general, he's going to get overrun next turn probably. This unit is demoralized or broken or whatever it's called. He's managed to get back to this ridge. Not sure how much of a chance the Allies have. If these units come in, again, they can't do anything by the wording of the rules until any of these units rout, but they're probably just going to be eliminated before that happens. And down here on this road, the British trying to hold it, but these cavalry can just basically go wherever they want. They can just swing around behind, and then suddenly this unit is getting a -3 DRM. So it looks pretty hopeless for the British here, and maybe I haven't played it that way, but I'm also just I'm giving up at this point because it is such a chore to play. You can see I have cubes all over the map because the game doesn't come with enough markers to mark the things it needs you to mark. And so when units are taking hits, I don't have hit markers of the right number to be able to put on them. So it seems, this whole game does not seem like it was play tested whatsoever. It seems like it was designed on paper and then produced and sent out the door. And there are just so many rough edges that it is, from minute to minute gameplay perspective, not fun. It's the decisions. There are meaningful decisions, but they are buried by the amount of consulting the rules and the amount of bookkeeping you have to do with all these markers, because different units, when they move, can't fire, and when they fire, can't move. And so you've got to put markers on and off, but then the different phases means you have to keep track of in your head, okay, if I fired in this phase, I can't move on the next phase, which could straddle a turn. So you're never quite sure. And so you're constantly trying to keep track of how the markers get put on. There's a huge black hole in the rules around HQs and leaders about whether or not they count towards stacking or density. So they don't count towards stacking, but on the player aid, there's a density bonus. And it doesn't say whether or not they're in there. It makes an equivalence between companies and battalions, but it doesn't mention regiments. I assume they don't count towards density. But then you get into weird situations where it's like, okay, if this HQ is like sitting here by itself and he gets attacked, there's no density shift, okay. But how many hits does he take? Well, the rules say it's number of steps is number of strength points. So I assume one hit would eliminate him. But then I look at the German HQs and they don't have a firepower number. So how many steps do they have? Can I even hit German HQs? Like, it's just stuff like that, like, it literally, if someone had sat down and played this for the first time, they would have had this list of questions, and the designer and developers would have been like, oh yeah, we need to specify that. But it doesn't seem like any of that work was done here, which is interesting and mind-boggling to me. So all in all, I hate that this is a really negative video, because I really wanted to like this game, and I think there is a cool core idea here with this sort of combat system and the dice. I really like this idea that you're shooting at terrain, and your sort of risk reward about if you stack up units or not. Because obviously if you move and stack them up, they have more firepower. They can all shoot together, but then, they risk counterattack of hitting them back because they're stacked in like a really dense formation. But I think that the sort of benefits of stacking kind of outweigh, or the risks of stacking outweigh the benefits. So you're seeing me that I'm not really stacking units. And maybe that's wrong. But when it all is said and done, I have so many other games that I could play that I know are going to be better than this. And I just can't struggle through this anymore. I just have lost the will. It's broken me. So right now I would say that this is definitely an avoid. It's a shame because it's a cool topic and it's a cool situation. The balance feels a little weird, but my tactical decisions may not be that great. But I would say avoid this for now. I think the rules need to go back to the oven, and they need to cook a little more, and there needs to be some serious play testing done in this game to bring it up to a spot where it is not agonizing to experience. Next game up is going to be another World War I game, hopefully better than this. I think it will be, and it is one that I have not yet showed you, so it's going to be brand new for everyone if you've been watching this channel for over the last couple of weeks. And that should be pretty interesting. I will tell you it's from Compass, and it is not Balance of Powers. There you go. I'll see you next time.